My son raised his glass and said I was nothing more than his mother's mistake. The words cracked through the dining room like broken glass. For a second, the chandelier above Jonathan's polished oak table seemed to tremble, its light spilling across the china plates, as if even it recoiled. Around me, forks froze mid-air. My son Jonathan Vera, 50 years old, dressed in his usual crisp suit that screamed success, looked me in the eye with a smirk that told me he meant every syllable. My name is Naomi Vera. I am 75 years old. I once spent decades bent over wooden frames and delicate wires in a small Chicago workshop where I helped craft pianos by hand. Those instruments carried my sweat and my pride. They were my proof that a woman like me could build something that lasted. And yet, in that moment, my only child made me feel like nothing I had ever done counted for anything. Jonathan's wife, Sophia, sat to his left, her hand resting lightly on his arm. At 46, she carried herself like a hostess at a gala. Chin high, smile calculated, eyes darting around to gauge how the other guests would react. She didn't flinch at his words. If anything, her lips curved higher, satisfied that the insult had landed exactly where she wanted it. The dinner was hers, after all, a showcase for Jonathan's colleagues and neighbors in their new suburban mansion. I was simply there as decoration, a relic of a past they were eager to sweep away. I felt the heat rise in my chest. My son's house was sprawling and immaculate, all white stone and glass, the kind of place designed to erase any trace of struggle. They had seated me near the end of the table, not quite in the spotlight, not quite invisible, as if I belonged to neither world. I had sat through enough dinners like this, enough shallow toasts to new ventures and empty compliments about success, while my own stories, my sacrifices, lay silent. But never had Jonathan dared say aloud what I always feared he thought. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the waiter paused in the corner, unsure whether to move. Jonathan chuckled, clinking his glass against Sophia's. "Two mistakes that somehow make us stronger," he added, his tone mocking, inviting the others to laugh. A few forced chuckles rippled down the table. No one dared defend me. I looked at my son, the boy I had carried, the man I had raised in the shadow of a husband long gone, and I felt something inside me harden. I had swallowed insults before, endured being overlooked, endured silence. But this, to be called a mistake, in front of strangers. My voice rose before I even realized what I was doing. "You want to talk about mistakes, Jonathan?" My hand trembled as I reached into my bag. I had not planned to use it tonight, but instinct told me this was the moment. My fingers closed around the envelope I had carried for weeks, its paper already creased from being folded and refolded. I pulled it out and laid it on the tablecloth, the stark white against the crimson runner. His eyes narrowed. "Mother, not now." I pressed the envelope flat with my palm. "This is your father's DNA test," I said. My words sliced through the room, every syllable deliberate. "And it proves he was not your father." The air collapsed. A spoon clattered against porcelain somewhere near the middle of the table. Sophia's painted nails tightened on her wineglass, but her face betrayed nothing. Jonathan's colleagues shifted in their seats, caught between horror and fascination. My son's expression froze, the arrogance draining until only disbelief remained. I did not shout. My voice was steady, steadier than I felt. "You called me a mistake, but the truth is, Jonathan, the mistake was never mine." The silence that followed was the kind could taste. Heavy, metallic, the kind that tells you nothing will ever be the same. I remembered then who I was. Naomi Vera, widow of David, who had spent her life bent over piano frames so her son could study in clean schools, so he could walk into rooms like this one without shame. I remembered the long nights I worked while David coughed in bed, the meals I skipped so Jonathan could eat better, the years of silence I endured when whispers about him reached me from corners of the community. All of it rushed back, colliding with the present until my spine straightened and my shoulders no longer sagged. Jonathan finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous," he barked, though the crack in his tone betrayed him. "You drag out some paper. What? To humiliate me? At my table?" "His table, not ours. His." Sophia leaned in, whispering something in his ear, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. She had known, or at least suspected. Her satisfaction at my humiliation earlier now flickered into something else. Control. If Jonathan's identity faltered, hers could solidify. She could rewrite the family narrative entirely, with me erased, with her elevated. I did not give her time to spin. You wanted to brand me as nothing more than a mistake in front of your friends, I said. So I gave you the truth in front of them too. The guests began to shift uncomfortably, some glancing toward the exits, others staring into their wine glasses as if they might find refuge there. No one touched the roasted lamb cooling in the center of the table. The scent of rosemary and garlic hung heavy, cloying. Jonathan shoved his chair back, the scrape echoing. Get out, he hissed. If you can't respect me in my own home, then you don't belong here. I rose slowly, clutching the envelope in my hand, though I had already revealed its content. My knees ached, but I did not falter. For years, I had bent my body and my will for this family. Tonight I stood straight. I could have left then. I could have walked out and let the shame bury him. But something stronger rooted me in place. I had carried the weight of secrets for decades, secrets not of my choosing, but forced on me. David had begged me to stay silent. For the sake of reputation, for the sake of appearances, I had swallowed the truth until it festered. But Jonathan's words tore the last thread of restraint. This test is not about humiliating you, I said, my voice calm now. It is about ending the silence that has poisoned us all. I turned to the room, to the polished faces trying to pretend they were not enthralled by the spectacle. You sit here celebrating his success? I said, nodding toward Jonathan. But do you know what it cost? Do you know who carried the burden while he rose? My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the force of memory. I did. And yet tonight, I was called a mistake. No one answered. They didn't need to. The truth hung thick, undeniable. Jonathan's face burned red, his jaw clenched. You're finished, he spat. You'll regret this. I looked at him, my only child, and felt both grief and resolve twist together. No, I said softly. For the first time in my life, I will not. The room exhaled. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the glass walls of Jonathan's mansion, I could hear the faint hum of traffic on the highway, the world moving on indifferent. But inside that dining room, everything had shifted. I gathered my bag, the envelope, still in hand, and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one dared. Behind me, the weight of their silence followed like a shadow. Ahead of me, for the first time in years, stretched the possibility of truth. And though my heart ached, though my hands shook, I knew this was only the beginning. I left Jonathan's house that night with the weight of every stare still pressing against my back. The cold air cut my cheeks, but it was not sharp enough to erase the echo of his words. You're just my mother's mistake. It replayed in my head, louder than the traffic on the avenue, louder than the clinking glasses that had filled the room before I spoke. When I reached my own home, the silence greeted me like an old enemy, wrapping itself around the furniture and the piano that stood in the corner. That piano had outlived my husband David, outlived the workshop where I once earned our bread, outlived every sacrifice. Now it seemed to lean toward me, as if asking how long I would let my son dictate whether my existence mattered. The following morning, I found the first evidence that Jonathan and Sophia had already been preparing to erase me long before that dinner. In the mail, between advertisements and hospital bills, there was a glossy newsletter from a local charity. It celebrated Jonathan and Sophia's legacy gift, a new scholarship in their names. There was a picture of them smiling in front of a podium, Sophia holding the ceremonial check. Behind them hung a banner with the family name. Only it was theirs alone. No mention of me. No mention of David. No hint that the sacrifices of my life had built the foundation they were standing on. It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. I had been airbrushed out. When I called Jonathan's office, his assistant told me he was unavailable. I asked for Sophia, knowing she managed most of these social appearances. She came on the line, her voice silky, deliberate. Naomi dear, you must understand, she said. These events are about the future. We can't dwell on old stories. People want to see fresh faces, strong leaders. It's not personal. It's progress. Progress. That was the word she chose to justify cutting me away from my own family's name. I didn't answer her. I hung up the phone and sat at the kitchen table staring at the piano keys. I ran my fingers across them, though I had not played in years. A single note rang out, thin and mournful, and in that moment I realized what was happening. They weren't just ignoring me. They were erasing me. Later that week I discovered just how far they had gone. I was invited almost as an afterthought, a brunch Sophia organized for close friends. She paraded a new family album across the table, pages of Jonathan shaking hands with city officials, Sophia at luncheons, Ethan as a child in a tailored suit, and when she reached the wedding photos, I froze. My face was gone. I had been cut out and replaced with a cropped image of flowers. In some photos I remained, but blurred, tucked at the edges like furniture in the background. She didn't even hide what she was doing. She turned the pages with satisfaction, meeting my eyes only once, as if daring me to object. I sat still, because that is what I had been trained to do. All my life, silence had been my shield. But in that moment I realized silence had also been my cage. I remembered how David had once told me we must keep certain truths buried, that respectability was worth more than honesty. I had obeyed. I had carried his secrets as if they were my own, and now his son, armed with his wife's ambitions, was using that same silence to bury me alive. That afternoon, when the guests left, I lingered in Sophia's perfect kitchen. Marble counters, polished appliances, flowers, imported from somewhere far from the soil I had once turned with my own hands. On the refrigerator was a schedule printed neatly, a list of family obligations. At the bottom, highlighted in soft gold ink, was an appointment. Tours, Silver Pines, residence, Naomi. It was my name, written like a task, a chore to be completed. When Sophia noticed me staring, she didn't bother to hide. Jonathan and I have been thinking, she said smoothly, about what's best for you. Silver Pines is a wonderful place, Naomi. Private rooms, activities, full care. You'll be surrounded by people your age. No more heavy lifting, no more worrying about the house. Doesn't that sound like peace? Peace. That was her word for exile. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not then. My chest ached as though every breath carved into me. She placed her manicured hand on mine, pretending warmth. You've done enough. Let us take care of things now. But I saw it clearly. It wasn't about care. It was about control, removing me from my own home, the only place where David's presence still lived, in the scuffs on the floor, the dust in the curtains, the weight of the piano. If they moved me out, they could lock the door on everything that had defined my life. That night I sat by the piano, the house dark except for a single lamp. I opened the bench where the old sheet music still rested, brittle pages smelling faintly of ink and dust, and beneath those sheets, hidden where no one else would look, was the envelope from the bank. The statement showed the lien Jonathan had placed on my property months earlier. He had used the house and the piano as collateral, signed the documents without telling me. My signature was forged, the handwriting a clumsy imitation of mine. He hadn't even asked. My breath came ragged. The house, the piano, even the walls that held my memories, they had all been claimed behind my back. He hadn't waited for me to die, he had already taken them. I pressed my hand against the keys, pressing down hard enough that a dissonant chord rang through the room, startling even me. It was the sound of betrayal, the sound of a life dismantled not by strangers but by the son I had carried. 4 days I moved through routine like a ghost. Neighbors waved, I nodded. At the market, I bought bread and milk as if everything were ordinary. But inside, every glance, every smile felt like pretense. My life had cracked open, and no one could see it but me. Then Ethan came, my grandson, 27, with his violin case slung over his shoulder, eyes weary from the weight of a family divided. He sat at my kitchen table, noticing the envelope still spread across it. Grandma, he said quietly, they're saying things that don't sound right. Dad's angry, Mom's rewriting everything. I don't know what to believe anymore. Looked at him, at the boy who once tugged at my apron while I baked bread, the young man who now sought something real in a family of illusions. Believe what you see, I told him. My voice shook, but not from weakness, from the truth pushing to be heard. I tapped the envelope. This is what they don't want you to know. He opened it, read the bank's cold lines, the evidence of the lien. His face paled. They used your name, without asking. They did more than use it, I said. They tried to erase it, and they will keep trying, unless I stop them. For a long time he said nothing. He simply stared at the piano, at the worn edges of the keys, at the scars of use etched into the wood. Then he looked back at me, and I saw in his eyes the flicker of something I had thought lost forever. He saw me not as a relic, not as a burden, but as the keeper of a truth that mattered. The silence between us was heavy, but it was different from the silence I had carried all my life. This one was not forced. It was full of possibility. I knew Then that the war for my place in this family had only begun. The days after, Sophia's brunch passed like a slow march through fog. My body still woke before dawn, a habit carved from years of factory work, but the hours stretched with no purpose. Each morning, I sat by the piano, its wood faded from age, and listened to the house groan under its own weight. I thought often of the dinner where Jonathan had called me a mistake, of the glossy pages of that album where Sophia had cut me away. I thought of my name printed in a schedule as though I were an errand to be checked off. All of it settled on me, like dust that could not be brushed away. It was Ethan who broke the stillness. He arrived one afternoon with his violin case, his hair damp from the rain, his shoulders hunched as if the weight of his parents' ambition pressed him down. He had always carried that tension, torn between their hunger for recognition and his own quiet love of music. He set the case gently on the table, his eyes tracing the lines in my face. "Grandma," he said softly, "they've started talking about you at the parties, about what you said at dinner." I didn't ask what words they used. I already knew. The story would not be told as a mother standing against her son's cruelty. It would be told as an old woman losing her mind, stirring shame where silence should have remained. Jonathan had always been skilled at shaping perception. Sophia, even more so. I had no doubt they would polish their version until it gleamed. Ethan hesitated, then opened his case. The violin inside was old, the varnish worn, the strings polished from practice. He drew the bow across once, the note filling the kitchen, with a tremor that reminded me of evenings long ago when David played to drown out the fatigue of the day. Ethan's gaze lingered on the piano in the corner. "They don't talk about this anymore," he said. "About how all of this started with music, with you and Grandpa." I swallowed hard. "They don't want to remember," I answered. "Because remembering means acknowledging where they came from." His bow hovered above the strings. "I don't care about their dinners, their speeches. I care about what's real." That night, after he left, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house, my hand brushing along the shelves where photo frames once stood before Jonathan insisted I modernize. I stopped at the drawer where I had hidden bank papers showing the anger that had simmered since the brunch began to rise. My silence had allowed too much. They had rewritten albums, they had printed newsletters, and now they had stolen my signature to bind my house to their debt. I decided I would not sit idle. The next morning I traveled to the bank. The lobby smelled of polished wood and cold marble, the kind of place that prides itself on appearances. When I asked to see the documents, the clerk hesitated, clearly unsure whether to indulge a 75-year-old widow who walked with careful steps. But when I pressed, when I told them it was my name on those papers, they relented. I sat at a desk as the copies were placed before me. My hands shook, not from age but from fury. The signature at the bottom was mine in name only. The strokes were clumsy, uneven, the loop of the V, nothing like the one I had written thousands of times in my life. The clerk murmured something about contacting legal, but I closed the folder before she could finish. I didn't need their reassurances. What I needed was proof, and I now held it in my hands. On my way home, I passed by a bookstore. In the window was a book about the history of Chicago families, full of glossy portraits. I stopped cold when I saw Jonathan and Sophia's faces. On the cover, they had managed to slide themselves into pages that once belonged to people who had built this city from the ground up. I stepped inside, flipping quickly through the pages until I found the section. A full spread. Jonathan shaking, hands with the mayor, Sophia cutting a ribbon, Ethan performing at a recital, and beneath it, a caption that read, "The Vera Legacy, a story of vision and innovation." There was no mention of the piano factory, no mention of David, no mention of me. I stood in that aisle with the book heavy in my hands, my breath uneven. Legacy, they had stolen that word. That evening, I sat at my table with the bank papers spread before me. The lamplight caught the forged ink, casting shadows that seemed to sneer. I knew then, I was no longer fighting for dignity alone. I was fighting for my very existence in the story of this family. Jonathan arrived unannounced 2 days later. He walked into my kitchen, as though he still owned the space, his suit unwrinkled, his cologne sharp. "Mother," he said without preamble, "I've heard you've been making inquiries. At the bank, at the store. This needs to stop." I looked at him steadily. "What needs to stop is your theft. You used my name without permission. You took what isn't yours." He laughed, but the sound was brittle. "I took what was necessary. You live alone in this crumbling house, clinging to an old piano like it's worth something. Meanwhile, I'm building a future. Don't you understand? You're dragging us backward. I rose from my chair, the papers clutched in my hand. Backward. It was these hands that built the path you walk on. Without this house, without the sacrifices you mock, you would have nothing to polish for your friends. His jaw tightened, but he masked it with a smile. You're sentimental. That's always been your weakness. Sophia and I will handle things from here. Consider it a relief. A relief. As though stripping me of my name, my home, my history was a kindness. When he left, I sat at the piano and pressed a single key. The note trembled through the house like a reminder that truth cannot be silenced forever. I thought of David, of how he once told me that some secrets must never surface, that silence could shield us. But the silence had become a weapon, sharpened now by our own son. I knew then that the only way forward was to expose every hidden page, every forged signature, every erased photograph. They wanted me invisible. Instead, I would make myself impossible. To ignore Dot as I closed the piano lid, I felt a certainty settle in me. Jonathan believed I was powerless, a relic too frail to matter. He did not yet understand that I had lived 75 years learning to endure, to wait, to listen, and now, for the first time, I would use all of it against him. This was no longer about a dinner, or an insult, or a single piece of paper. It was about reclaiming the truth before it vanished entirely, and I would not let them win, I had thought. The silence inside my house was heavy, but the silence in the church was heavier. That week, after the confrontation at the bank and Jonathan's visit, I went to the parish I had not stepped into for years. The wooden pews were polished, the air cool, the faint smell of incense lingering, as though time itself had never passed. I did not go there for faith. I went because I needed to look at something older than my pain, something that could remind me I was not invisible, that was there. I crossed paths with Father Michael Torres. He was 65 now, his hair silver at the temples, his shoulders still broad despite the years. He had been in this parish since my youth, baptizing children, blessing marriages, burying the dead. He had buried David. When he saw me sitting alone near the front, he walked quietly down the aisle and sat beside me. His voice was deep, measured, the same tone that had calmed me decades ago when the world seemed too loud. Naomi, he said, I wondered how long it would take before you came here. I didn't answer immediately. My hands rested in my lap, fingers twisted together. You've heard then, I said at last. I heard, he replied. This town talks, and your son has made sure the story spreads. The words cut though. I already knew them to be true. Jonathan was sculpting the narrative, and I was the stone he carved away. Father Michael looked at me with a steadiness that was difficult to face. You've carried something for a long time. I knew it when David was alive. I see it now. Secrets don't stay buried forever. They rot, and when they surface, they poison everything around them. I turned to him sharply. Then, why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you tell me years ago? His face softened, lined with regret. Because David begged me not to. He came to me once, late at night, when Jonathan was still a boy. He asked for guidance, but what he really wanted was permission to remain silent. He believed if the truth came out, it would destroy him, destroy you, destroy the boy. My chest tightened. I had always suspected David's hand in the silence, but hearing it spoken aloud stripped away any illusion that he had been blameless. He had chained me with secrecy, and Father Michael had helped hold the lock. The priest continued. I told him that hiding the truth would come with a cost. He accepted that cost, but it was you, Naomi, who paid it. I looked at the crucifix above the altar, the figure nailed in perpetual suffering. And for the first time in years I understood the weight of sacrifice not as salvation, but as punishment. I have papers, I whispered, more to myself than to him. Bank records, forged signatures, proof that Jonathan has already taken what isn't his. Father Michael nodded slowly. Bring them to me. There are archives here, old records from families, documents that people wanted forgotten. If you let me, I'll search. There may be more than you realize. David left more behind than his silence. When I returned home, the house felt different. Less like a tomb, more like a battlefield. I gathered the bank documents, the newsletters, even the charity pamphlet with Jonathan and Sophia's smiling faces, and placed them in a folder. The next day, I returned to the church and handed it to Father Michael. His hands, still strong, though veined with age, closed around it with care. I will look, he said. And when I find what you need, I will not keep it from you. This time, for the first time in weeks, I felt something I had nearly forgotten, the faint pulse of possibility. But Jonathan and Sophia did not give me long to breathe. That weekend, they hosted another dinner. This time, I was not invited. Instead, my neighbor slipped a program into my mailbox, an announcement of a fundraiser Sophia was chairing. On the back, in bold print, was the story of the Vera family's rise. It spoke of Jonathan's brilliance, Sophia's vision, Ethan's promise. My name was not on the page. Neither was David's. The family tree had been pruned, the roots severed. When I showed Ethan, he stared at the pamphlet until his knuckles whitened. They can't just erase you, he said. They can, I replied. They already have. But as I said it, I realized I didn't believe it anymore. They could try, but I would not let them. That night, I dreamt of the piano factory, the clang of hammers, the smell of varnish, the rhythm of men and women working side by side. I remembered, my hands raw from sanding, my back bent over strings, my laughter with David before life pressed the joy from us. Those memories were mine, but if Jonathan had his way, they would be lost. My life would be edited down to absence. The next morning, Father Michael called. His voice was low, urgent. Naomi, I found something. It's not just about Jonathan's birth, it's about David. He wrote letters. He left them here, in the parish archives. He wanted me to destroy them. I didn't. My breath caught. Letters, yes, they reveal what he knew, and why he kept silent. You need to see them. I agreed to meet him that afternoon. As I walked through the church doors, sunlight filtered through stained glass, splashing colors across the floor. Father Michael led me to a small office lined with shelves of old records. He opened a drawer, pulled out a thin bundle bound with twine, and laid it gently on the desk. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting unmistakably David's. I reached for it with trembling hands. The first line I read was enough to shatter the remnants of my loyalty. I know Jonathan is not mine by blood. Still, I cannot reject him. He is Naomi's child, and I will raise him as my own. The words blurred as my eyes filled, not because David had accepted the boy, but because he had admitted the truth long ago, and still forced me into silence. He had chosen to protect himself, his pride, while I bore the weight alone. Father Michael placed a hand on my shoulder. There is more. He wrote about the pressure, about the whispers in the community. He feared scandal. He wanted to be seen as honorable, no matter the cost. I pressed the letters to my chest, my body shaking. So he condemned me to this, to a lifetime of shame and secrets, only for Jonathan to now use that silence to erase me. Father Michael's eyes were steady. Then it is time the silence ends. These letters belong to you. I carried them home, their weight heavier than any burden I had lifted in the factory. I sat at the piano, placed the letters on its lid, and stared at the keys. The house hummed with ghosts. Jonathan thought he could strip me of my place. Sophia thought she could replace me with polished lies. But now, I held David's words, proof not only of what I had endured, but of what they had all tried to bury. For the first time, I felt the silence begin to crack, and I knew what I must do next. I laid David's letters across my kitchen table like fragile relics. The ink had faded, the edges curled from years of hiding, but the words carried more weight than any document Jonathan or Sophia could fabricate. He had admitted the truth in his own hand. He knew Jonathan was not his son. He had chosen silence, and that silence had shackled me for decades. Now those same letters burned in front of me, proof that my sacrifice had been real, proof that Jonathan's arrogance was built on lies. I stared at them long into the night, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the occasional groan of the house, as if it, too, remembered. At last I gathered the papers into a folder and slipped them into my bag. They were no longer safe in a drawer. They belonged in my hands until the time came to use them. The following day, I went to Jonathan's house uninvited. The door opened, onto marble floors and glass walls, a home so polished it felt like no one truly lived there. Sophia greeted me, her smile fixed, her voice sweet. Naomi, she said, as if surprised, though I knew she had been expecting me since the letters resurfaced. What a rare visit. I did not waste words. I need to speak with Jonathan. She tilted her head, the diamond at her ear catching the light. He's busy. Investors, meetings, you understand. I stepped past her into the foyer. He will see me. Sophia's mask slipped just enough for me to see the steel beneath. You're playing a dangerous game, she whispered, entered from his study, his voice booming before he even saw me. What now, mother? Another accusation. Another spectacle. I set the folder on the glass coffee table and slid it toward him. Read. He frowned but opened the first page. His eyes scanned the words, and I watched the color drain from his face. He flipped to the next, then the next, his movements growing sharper with each line. At last he slammed the folder shut and shoved it back. Fabrications. Old scraps of paper. You expect anyone to believe this? They're in your father's hand, I said calmly. He wrote them. He admitted the truth. Sophia crossed her arms. And what do you plan to do with them, Naomi? Parade them in front of neighbors. Send them to the papers. You'd only disgrace yourself. I held her gaze. No, I will show them to whoever needs to see that my life cannot be erased. If you think you can cut me out of history, think again. Jonathan stood, towering, his anger shaking the air. You've gone too far. First the dinner, now this. You're destroying everything I've built. If you force this, you'll regret it. I rose to meet him eye to eye, though my height barely reached his shoulder. I've lived 75 years with regret. Jonathan, it no longer frightens me. His jaw clenched. Sophia placed a hand on his arm, pulling him back as if to restrain a storm. Leave, she ordered, her voice sharp now, the mask gone. If you want to live out your final years in peace, you'll keep those papers buried. I left without another word, but my chest was tight with fire. They had underestimated me, again. They thought fear would silence me. They thought exile would contain me. They did not understand that every insult, every erasure, had only made me stronger. 2 days later, Ethan arrived at my house. He carried his violin, as always, but this time he also brought a look of urgency. Grandma, he said, Dad's telling people you've lost your mind. He says you're inventing stories, waving old papers to get attention. Mom's repeating it everywhere. They're trying to turn everyone against you. I showed him the letters. His fingers trembled as he unfolded them, his eyes scanning David's words. He looked up, stricken. So Grandpa knew, all this time. He knew, I said. And he chose silence. And I chose silence with him. But silence has become their weapon. They want me gone. They want even you to forget where you came from. Ethan sank into the chair, his violin case slipping to the floor. I don't want to forget, but they'll never forgive me if I stand with you. I placed my hand over his. You have to decide what matters more, truth or their approval. I can't choose for you. But know this. If they succeed, you'll lose more than me. You'll lose yourself. He sat with that, quiet, his face torn between loyalty and conscience. I saw in him the same conflict that had haunted me for decades, the pull between silence and honesty, between protecting appearances and protecting the soul. Later that week, word reached me from the bank again. Jonathan had increased the loan, deeper into debt, using the house and the piano as collateral. It was reckless, desperate, and it proved he was not invincible. I knew then that his empire, shiny as it looked, was rotting from the inside. I returned to Father Michael with the letters. He read them slowly, his lips tightening with each line. Naomi, he said at last, these are powerful. They confirm what you've said. But more than that, they expose the lie your son is living. He's built everything on denial. If these words see light, his image will shatter. I don't want to ruin him, I whispered, though even as I said it, I wondered if that was still true. I want to reclaim what is mine, my name, my place. Then use them wisely, he said. The truth is not a weapon to swing blindly, it is a key. Use it to unlock what they've tried to lock away. As I walked home with the letters tucked close, I knew the fight was no longer private. Jonathan and Sophia had declared war on my memory. I would answer not with rage, but with precision. That evening, I sat at the piano and opened the lid. My fingers pressed against the keys, uneven but steady. The notes rang out into the dark, and for the first time in years, I felt David's presence not as silence, but as witness. He had chosen secrecy. I would choose exposure. Jonathan thought he had stripped me of power. Sophia thought she had erased me from the record. But they had both miscalculated. I was not gone. I was gathering strength. And when the time came, I would show them what a mistake truly looked like. The package on my porch was the kind that holds old trouble, brown paper, twine tied tight, my name written in a hand that knew me before I learned to live inside silence. I carried it to the kitchen, set it beside the piano bench, and slipped the knot loose. Inside lay a faded photograph, a hospital bracelet, the color of skim milk, and a folded letter sealed with tape that had long ago lost its stick. Underneath them sat a small brass key with a tag that read only, "Storage." The note on top said, in a firm, slanted script I had not seen in half a century, "We need to talk." It was signed by Miriam Khan, 78 now, the first girl who ever stood between me and a lie. I met Miriam that afternoon at a diner near the bus station where we used to count coins for coffee. She walked in with her spine straight, her white hair pinned in a nonsense twist, eyes the same sharp gray that used to catch every secret before it broke. She was older, like me, but time had not softened her edges. She had been my friend when we were young and unguarded, a witness to the parts of me I had buried. She slid into the booth without ceremony. "You look like I remember," she said, not unkindly, and placed her weathered hand over mine, just more honest. I told her about Jonathan's dinner, about the DNA test, about the forged signature at the bank, about the letters Father Michael had kept. She listened without interrupting, the way people do when they already know the shape of the story and are waiting for the moment it turns. When I finished, she nodded toward my bag. "You brought the photograph." I handed it to her. The image showed two girls on a park bench, hair blown wild, the city rising behind us like a dare. Miriam tapped the corner. "That day," she said, "you told me you loved a boy who played piano with his whole body. You said every note felt like fresh air." I knew the name before she spoke it. Ari Levin. He had hands made for music and a laugh that filled rooms. He could find melody in rainwater and make a broken upright sound like a grand. He had plans bigger than our neighborhood. We had been barely more than children, but we'd known the difference between noise and song. Miriam set the photo on the table and lifted the hospital bracelet. "You went away for a while after that summer," she said. "Your mother told everyone you were visiting an aunt. You came back quieter. David asked you to marry him 2 months later." I held the bracelet between my fingers. The plastic had stiffened with age, but my maiden name was still legible, ink faded yet stubborn. The date was there too, a winter morning that had frozen me into someone obedient. I remembered the clinic's fluorescent lights and the nurse who avoided my eyes, the way my mother folded her lips into a line so thin it might have disappeared. I remembered the pressure of a pen in my hand, the papers that promised a future. If I would only pretend the past had not existed. "Ari left town," I said. "My parents called it saving me. David called it protecting our good name. Father Michael told me some truths can be held, like breath, until the worst passes." Believed them. Miriam drew the folded letter from the package and rested it on the formica between us. "This was meant for you. David gave it to me the week before your wedding and told me to destroy it. He said if you read it, you would run." I was young, but I wasn't careless. I kept it. My hand shook as I opened the paper. David's handwriting, again, familiar and careful. He wrote about duty and fear, about how scandal can eat a family from the inside. He admitted he knew about Ari. He said he would marry me and name Jonathan his own, that he would hold the line against gossip so the boy could grow without shame. At the end, a single sentence stopped my breath cold. "If you ever choose truth over safety, I will understand, and I will not stand in your way." He had stood in my way anyway. He had made his request to Father Michael, made his case to my parents, made his fear larger than my freedom, and I had agreed. For years we survived on that agreement. We called it love because it was convenient. He thought he was saving me. I said, he thought he was saving all of us. Miriam's voice lost its edge. He thought he was saving himself. But that part belongs to the dead now. This part belongs to you. She slid the brass key across the table. David rented a storage unit the year Jonathan turned 12. He brought me this key and asked me to hold it. Said if anything ever happened to him, you should have it. I asked him what was inside. He said, proof of who we were, of who she was, before I asked her to pretend. I felt something settle into place, like a string pulled taut. Proof, not gossip, not accusation. Something that held weight beyond my memory. We drove to the storage facility while the sky pressed low and gray. Inside, the corridors were long and fluorescent, the doors like rows of quiet mouths. The lock on David's unit protested before it gave. The door rolled up and the cold smell of cardboard and cedar greeted us. Piled neatly on shelves were boxes labeled in David's careful letters: music, house, factory, Naomi. Miriam reached for the one that had my name. We set it on the concrete and lifted the lid. There were programs from concerts we could never afford but sometimes found our way into. Pressed flowers from places we pretended were grand. A stack of letters in my handwriting I had no memory of, sending envelopes addressed but never mailed. Beneath them lay a ledger bound in cloth, the ink almost black. The first page read, Naomi's work, 1967 to 1974. David had catalogued everything I made in those early years at the piano workshop, every hour, every instrument that carried my hand. At the bottom of each page he had written the name of the craftsman who finished the piece and the purchaser who took it home. I ran my fingers over the columns like they were braille. I had thought those years belonged to sweat and simple pride. To see them recorded with such precision felt like stepping into a room where my younger self had kept her voice in a jar. Miriam reached deeper and brought up a sealed envelope with my maiden name. Inside was a county form, pink from age. It recorded a birth filed late. Father listed as acknowledged. The date aligned with Jonathan's second week in the world. Beneath it lay a carbon copy of an affidavit signed by David, stating he accepted legal responsibility as father. The line for biological father was left blank. A rectangle of absence on an official page. Beside the forms rested a small bundle wrapped in muslin. When I unwound it, a strip of pale blue ribbon fell into my lap. I knew it immediately. It had been tied to the corner of the blanket Jonathan was wrapped in the day the nurse placed him in my arms. I had kept that blanket for years, until a fire in the old building swallowed it whole. The ribbon was all that remained, saved by someone who thought the small things mattered. We found more. A photograph of Ari at a piano in a basement club, head thrown back, mouth open in a grin I had tried not to remember. A clipping from a local newspaper announcing his acceptance to a conservatory in New York. The article was smudged where a thumb had lingered. A postcard from a winter 3 decades ago. A skyline drawn in black ink. No message, just a single word on the back, always, and no signature. Miriam held the postcard to the light. He sent it to me for you after you married, she said quietly. Your mother intercepted everything from him to our house. He asked me to tell you he moved on, that it was better this way. He wanted you free of him. I never believed he meant it. I didn't ask where Ari was, now. I didn't need to know if he was alive somewhere or under a stone. Some loves don't survive the world. They become part of its weather. What mattered was not a reunion. What mattered was the shape of the truth that had been denied space to grow. We carried the box, labeled Naomi, to my car like it contained porcelain. Back at the house, I set the ledger on the piano, laid the legal forms beside David's letters, and placed the ribbon in the bench where I kept the oldest sheet music. The room felt fuller, not with ghosts, but with evidence. Jonathan and Sophia had been telling a story curated for applause. I finally had a story backed by paper. I called Ethan. I told him there were things he needed to see. He arrived as the light died, face pale from a day spent under expectation. When he stepped into the room and saw the spread on the piano, he reached for David's letters first, then for the county form, then for the photograph of Ari. His brow furrowed as he pieced together what he had never been told. He turned to me, searching for an anchor. I gave him what I could. I told him about the factory summers, the basement clubs, the laughter that used to protect me from fear. I told him about the clinic, the signatures, the vows taken for reasons that felt noble then. I did not spend many words on how it felt. Feelings are withered too. They blow through and leave bone. I focused on fact because fact would stand when the wind rose. Ethan set his violin case on the bench. This is who we are, he said, not asking, but deciding. He placed his palm on the piano's soundboard the way David once taught him to feel the vibration beneath the note. He closed his eyes and let the wood hum against his skin. I can work with this, he added. I can make them hear it. He opened the case and drew out the violin. He did not play a full piece. He only slid the bow lightly across the strings to match the resonance that still shivered in the piano. The two sounds met and held, a thin cord stretched between generations. It wasn't pretty. It was clear. When he left, I gathered the papers again and placed them in a canvas bag. I wrote a list on a yellow pad, copied the forms, notarized the letters, photographed the ledger, secure the key, call the county clerk for official copies, find a safe deposit box. I called Father Michael and told him what we had found. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded relieved. He said the church scanner was at my disposal, and the parish record room would hold the documents until I had a better place. 2 days later, while I was at the parish making copies, a moving truck idled in front of my house. My neighbor phoned me in a panic. Men had rolled the piano toward the door and were measuring the frame, papers in hand embossed with Jonathan's company letterhead. They said they had authorization to move non-essential items to climate-controlled storage. As if memory needed perfect air more than it needed a guardian. I called the driver and told him if he put a hand on that instrument, he would answer for theft. My voice was calm, firm, the kind of tone men in suits recognize because they know it has a receipt behind it. I told him I had legal proof the piano was not part of any agreement. I told him I had recorded the serial number in a ledger that predated Jonathan's company by 40 years. The man hesitated, then he left. When I hung up, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sudden knowledge that speed mattered now. Jonathan and Sophia were accelerating. They wanted the heart of the house gone before I could gather breath. That night I placed the ledger, the letters, and the county documents into 2 separate envelopes. One for Father Michael's archive, one for a safe deposit box at a different bank. I kept copies at home, in a fireproof tin that had held cake tins once, when sweetness felt like proof that a day had gone well. I tucked the ribbon in the pages of David's oldest composition, where it made the sheet bow slightly, a small rise, like breath. Before I slept, I pressed my ear to the side of the piano and tapped one key softly. The wood answered. It sounded like my name said out loud. It sounded like a door unsticking after a long winter. In the morning, I would take the documents to the clerk and request certified copies. I would sign affidavits. I would call the gala committee and offer a memorial performance for David under my name, not as a footnote but as a founder. I would put my history on record before anyone else tried to seal it shut. Jonathan had told a room full of strangers that I was nothing more than a mistake. He had believed that saying it made it true. What he never learned is that truth needs no permission. It waits, it gathers, and when it finally steps into the light, it does not ask to be welcomed. It walks to its rightful seat and sits down. The piano held the last note of the day as the sun slipped off the keys. The house felt heavier and steadier, as if it had finally agreed to help me carry what I should never have had to lift alone. I closed the lid and turned off the lamp. Tomorrow, the story would move again. This time, it would move in my direction. The email from the auction house landed before sunrise. A curt notice stamped with a lot number and a viewing time. It listed a 19th century upright piano by maker and serial, to be shown for private bidders in 2 days. The serial number was mine. The description noted consignor Vera Holdings. I set the kettle back on the stove without lighting it. Jonathan had moved faster than I expected, trying again to pry the heart out of my house and sell it to strangers under a company name that hid his hands. I didn't call him. I called the receptionist at Harrington & Sons Auctioneers. Her name was Dana Hart, a woman with a brisk voice that softened only when I said I was 75 and the instrument had my fingerprints in its grain. I introduced myself in full and told her I possessed a ledger cataloging the piano's serial and sale records from the factory years, handwritten by my late husband. I told her I could be in her lobby with that ledger within the hour. She paused, long enough for me to hear her bolts click into place. "Bring the document," she said, "and bring identification." I left the house with the ledger pressed against my chest like a shield. The morning air cut through my coat, but urgency warmed me. 2 buses and a short walk delivered me to the auction house's limestone facade, its glass doors reflecting a city that had learned to erase and rebuild without apology. Inside, Dana greeted me with a measured smile and led me to a conference room, where a man in a navy suit introduced himself as Peter Lang, the consignment director. His eyes were practiced at appraising and dismissing. He asked to see my proof. I opened the ledger to the page where the serial numbers marched in David's neat hand. I pointed to the one that matched the email and slid across a photocopy of the piano's original bill of lading, folded and refolded until the creases were white. Peter studied them with that cool, distant interest of a person trained to decide fates quickly. When he asked if I had any legal claim, I laid out the county affidavit David had signed when Jonathan was a child, and the bank's acknowledgement that a lien bearing my forged signature was under review. I kept my voice steady. "If you move that piano," I said, "you move stolen property. I will file a police report today." Dana watched Peter rather than me. I could see the calculation clicking behind his eyes. Publicity was their lifeblood. Scandal was their poison. "We'll suspend the lot pending verification," he said at last, the words landing like stones. "No movement until our counsel reviews your documentation." He slid a form across the table, asking for copies. I handed him duplicates I had prepared the night before and kept the originals under my palm. He nodded, and Dana escorted me to the lobby with a look that hovered between respect and warning. "They'll call the consignor," she said quietly at the door. "Be ready." I was ready. I expected Jonathan's call. Instead, Sophia rang. Her voice came sweet, then sharpened as soon as I confirmed where I had been. "You can't keep doing this," she said. "You're embarrassing yourself. You're clinging to objects like they're people." "The piano is not an object," I replied. "It's testimony." She laughed once, the sound thin as glass. "You're not the custodian of our history, Naomi. I am. And I'm done letting your sentimentality derail our plans." "Our plans," I repeated. "You mean your edits." She ended the call without a goodbye. I went straight from the auction house to the parish. Father Michael opened the archive room before I reached for the handle. "I heard from Dana," he said. "Her mother sits in my pew. Word travels." He looked exhausted and fierce in equal measure. I laid the auction email on the table and the ledger beside it. He read quickly. "You need another layer of protection," he said. "We'll notarize copies here, and I'll certify that these records have been in our custody since you brought them. If they try to claim tampering, the parish will answer." The day of the gala arrived cloaked in a chill that felt sharper than the season. The committee had reserved the ballroom of the Oakwood Conservatory, a glass and marble structure that wore prestige like a crown. From the outside, it looked like a palace built for people who feared obscurity more than death. As I walked toward the entrance, the program tucked inside my coat, I felt the ground beneath me tremble with every step, not because I was unsteady, but because I knew I was carrying the weight of decades of silence ready to split open. Ethan met me at the door. His violin case hung from his shoulder, his tie slightly crooked in a way that made him look younger and braver than 27 years should allow. He touched my elbow lightly, steadying me, though I didn't stumble. "I practiced until 3, he said quietly, as if confessing a crime. "You'll play as if you practiced all your life," I answered. He nodded, relief flashing in his eyes. The lobby was already brimming with guest donors in black ties, committee members wearing smiles that cost more than my month's groceries, and photographers poised to capture the carefully curated arrivals. I watched Sophia glide past them, a sapphire dress clinging to her like armor. Jonathan walked beside her, tailored suit immaculate, expression composed as though the scandal at dinner, the DNA test, the auction withdrawal had been nothing more than temporary weather. They looked untouchable. That illusion would not last. Inside the ballroom, round tables glittered with crystal and silver. At the front, the stage rose beneath a chandelier heavy enough to crush a weaker ceiling. A polished grand piano waited under the lights, its lid propped open like a mouth ready to sing. My pulse quickened when I saw an instrument I didn't know. Not ours, but still kin to the one in my home. The sight pressed memory against my chest, and I placed my hand over the program in my coat. The evening began with speeches, predictable words about community, legacy, generosity. Sophia was called to the podium, and she delivered her address with practiced elegance, weaving the Vera name into every sentence while sanding away any rough edges of truth. She spoke of Jonathan's leadership, their shared vision, the forward-thinking spirit of the Vera family. Not a syllable for David, not a breath for me. I let her have her applause. When she stepped down, I saw her glance at the program booklet in a woman's hand at table 5. Her smile faltered just slightly. She had realized the line about me was printed, permanent, immune to erasure. That small fracture was my first victory of the night. The schedule moved briskly. A jazz trio played background pieces. Dinner was served, the clinking of cutlery blending with polite laughter. I kept my eyes on the stage, waiting, when Lorraine, the program director, finally approached the microphone. Her voice cut through the noise with a calm authority. "We invite you now to a special memorial performance," she said. "Tonight, we honor the late David Vera, music teacher and craftsman, whose work shaped generations and whose spirit lives on through his family. Performing a newly uncovered composition by David Vera, titled Blue Ribbon, is his grandson, violinist Ethan Vera." The room shifted. The applause was hesitant at first, then fuller, though confusion pricked the edges. Jonathan's fork froze in midair. Sophia's smile stiffened into something strained and brittle. Ethan rose, opened his case, and carried his violin to the stage. I followed at a distance, carrying the framed ribbon and the manuscript tucked under my arm. When I reached the podium, I did not ask for permission. I placed the frame on the stand beside the piano, where the light struck it clear. The blue had faded, but the words on the manuscript for N, for the child, still burned. I set the pages on the stand and faced the crowd. My name is Naomi. Vera, I said, my voice amplified into corners where shadows sat. I built pianos with my hands for 7 years. I was married to David for 49. Tonight you will hear a piece he wrote for his family, a piece hidden until my grandson uncovered it days ago. It speaks not of wealth or prestige, but of love and endurance. That is the Vera legacy. Murmurs scattered across the tables. I saw Jonathan grip his napkin hard enough to tear it. Sophia's hand clenched his arm as if to keep him seated. Lorraine gave me the smallest nod from backstage, a signal that I could continue. So I stepped aside, and Ethan lifted his bow. The first notes unfurled like a thread pulled from silence. The melody rose clear and tender, then broadened, filling the vast hall until the chandeliers seemed to vibrate. Every phrase carried David's hand, his teaching voice, his humor. Ethan played with restraint where the music asked for gentleness, with fire where it demanded strength. I closed my eyes for a breath, and felt David standing beside me again, his humming aligned with the strings. The audience stilled, forks lowered, conversations ceased. By the second movement, people leaned forward in their chairs, drawn by something they could not dismiss. The composition was not flashy. It was honest, melodic, written to be remembered. When Ethan reached the final line, he let the bow linger an extra heartbeat, letting silence land heavy, dignified. Then he lowered the instrument. For a moment, the hall held its breath. Then applause erupted, unrestrained, the kind that could not be faked. I saw people stand, clapping harder, as if to make up for the silence that had buried the name Vera too long. Ethan bowed once, sweat glistening at his temple, then stepped back from the piano. I approached the microphone again, holding the manuscript aloft. This score was hidden inside the family piano. I said, "It is proof not only of David's authorship, but of a history some tried to erase. Tonight, you saw what endures." Jonathan shot to his feet then, voice slicing across the applause. "This is fabrication," he shouted. "This is manipulation from a bitter old woman who can't let go." His face burned red, his fists trembling at his sides. Sophia rose too, adding venom to his fury. She forged that manuscript, planted it to gain attention. "Don't let her poison this event with lies," the crowd murmured, discomfort thickening the air. I stood unmoved. I opened the portfolio I had carried and spread the notarized documents across the podium, the ledger page, the affidavit, the notarized seal of the parish. "These are authenticated records," I said clearly. "Witnessed by the parish, verified by the auction house." And here I held up the DNA test. The truth Jonathan tried to bury. He is not David's son. Yet David chose him, raised him, and loved him. That is not shame, that is strength. But denying the truth dishonors everyone. Gasps rippled through the hall. Cameras flashed. A man from the press table scribbled furiously. Jonathan's face crumpled into rage, but he could not mask the tremor in his hands. Sophia hissed at him to sit, but he barked back. "Don't tell me to sit." His voice echoed, sharp and raw. The facade cracked. Ethan stepped forward then, calm where Jonathan flailed. He addressed the room. "Not his father. My grandmother carried the truth while others tried to bury it. Tonight, you saw whose story endures. Not because of money or control, but because of music that cannot lie." The applause returned, louder, almost defiant. People turned their backs on Jonathan's fury and faced the stage instead. Sophia tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgent words, but he shook her off. He looked around and saw not supporters, only witnesses. For the first time, I saw fear replace arrogance in his eyes. Security approached, discreet but firm, ready to intervene if needed. Jonathan sank back into his chair, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the tablecloths. Sophia adjusted her dress, plastering on a brittle smile as if performance could save her. But the damage was irreversible. I gathered the documents into the portfolio, the manuscript still shining under the lights, the ribbon glowed faintly in its frame. I knew, in that moment, the battle was no longer about objects or papers. It was about presence, about refusing to be written out. I had stood on that stage and said my name aloud. No one could erase it. Now, after the performance ended and the program moved on, people came to me quietly, old neighbors, fellow parishioners, strangers who had taught in David's school. They touched my hand, thanked me, spoke of memories that tethered our family to the city. Each voice stitched another thread back into the fabric Sophia had cut apart. Ethan packed his violin with deliberate care, his hand still trembling from the intensity. He looked at me with eyes that no longer carried doubt. "It's done," he said softly. "Not done," I corrected, "but begun again." As we walked out of the ballroom together, the night air sharp against our faces, I felt the weight I had carried for 50 years lift just enough to let me breathe fully. Jonathan had tried to brand me as a mistake. Sophia had tried to delete me like a line from a program. But tonight, under the bright lights of their own stage, they failed. The truth had entered the record. The music had spoken. And I, Naomi Vera, was no longer silent. The days after the gala were quieter, but not less heavy. The newspapers picked up the story, some out of curiosity, others because they smelled scandal. Articles appeared with headlines like "Family Legacy Uncovered at Gala Performance" and "Local Heiress Faces Questions After Musical Revelation." Some reports were kinder, celebrating Ethan's performance, praising David's work. Others circled, like vultures, feeding on Jonathan's humiliation, Sophia's disgrace, and the tension that had long brewed beneath our name. He fetched the notary's seal from a drawer and marked each page with authority a thief could not imitate. When he pressed the heavy stamp into the paper, I felt the ground under me settle. The documents no longer lived only in my house. They lived in a place with locks and witnesses and light. In the afternoon, Ethan arrived. He had read Sophia's latest post about a family collection update, a euphemism for stripping my home clean. His eyes burned, but he kept his voice measured. "If they take the piano to that auction, they'll say they did it for maintenance, for preservation," he said. "They'll dress the theft as caretaking. They can't move it now," I told him. "Not without a fight, they'll lose." He set his violin case on the bench, then paused, fingers along the hinge of the fallboard. "When I was little," he said, "Grandpa told me some pianos hide things, notes beneath the notes. Do you mind?" I nodded. Ethan lifted the fallboard and ran his fingertips along the narrow cavity beneath the keys. Dust rose and settled in threads of light. His knuckle tapped something not wood. He fished gently and drew out a flat envelope collapsed by years. On the front, David had scrawled a single word in ink turned sepia. For later, Ethan handed it to me and stepped back. I slid a butter knife under the brittle flap and eased it open. Inside lay a stack of thin manuscript pages, 5 staves a sheet. Notes written in David's precise strokes. The title penciled at the top in block letters, "Blue Ribbon." The dedication beneath it was small and indelible. "For N, who made work sound like music. For the child who taught me fatherhood is a verb." I did not speak. I placed the first page on the stand and let the name settle into the room. Ethan leaned closer, reading as a musician reads, hearing before sound exists. He traced the opening phrase in the air with his bow. "It's accessible," he said, astonished. "It sings." He wrote this to be carried. He lifted the violin and played the first line soft enough for the strings to whisper. The melody crossed the room and tucked itself into the piano's belly, as if it had been waiting decades for permission. I felt my hands steady on the bench. Paper, ledger, affidavit, ribbon, now score. Not just stories. Evidence with a voice. Ethan lowered the bow. "Let me perform it," he said simply. "In public, not at some dinner Dad can control, but where the program can't be edited without someone noticing." "The gala," I said. "The one Sophia chaired, where she had rebranded our family into a parable with no roots." I reached for my list and added a new line. "Program request, David Vera Memorial Performance, Blue Ribbon." "We won't ask," I said. "We'll present, with documentation." We spent the evening preparing a packet, a copy of the manuscript, the ledger page with the serial, the county form, a paragraph I wrote as succinct as a courtroom statement. "My name is Naomi Vera. I worked at the Westridge Piano Works from 1967 to 1974. I was married to the late music teacher, David Vera. for 49 years. The enclosed materials establish provenance for the instrument and authorship for the composition Blue Ribbon. I request one memorial performance by my grandson, violinist Ethan Vera, and a printed acknowledgement of the Vera family history as recorded herein. Emailed the packet to the gala committee address listed on Sophia's brochures and hand-delivered a hard copy the next morning to the committee office, a brick building that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. The program director, a compact woman named Lorraine Park with a schedule written into every crease of her day, glanced through the documents and said, "We will review." I told her plainly that if my materials did not appear in the program, I would publish them in the parish bulletin and place them with the community paper that had covered our neighborhood since before Jonathan learned the word legacy. She regarded me for a long breath, weighing politics against paper. "We'll be in touch," she said. They were. That afternoon Lorraine called to confirm a late addition to the program, a memorial segment for David with a solo by Ethan, piece title to be announced. She requested my preferred language for the acknowledgement. I dictated a sentence and listened to her type it. In recognition of the Vera family's contributions to the city's musical and artisan heritage, with gratitude to Naomi Vera for decades of craftsmanship and community support. I heard the click of her save key. She lowered her voice then, as if someone else might be listening. "Mrs. Vera, there will be pushback. I need you to be ready." "I have been ready my whole life," I said. That evening, Sophia pounded on my door before I could boil water. She stepped over the threshold without waiting to be invited, anger wrapped tight around her poise. "How dare you go around me," she said. "This gala is my work, my relationships. Do you know how this makes me look?" I did not raise my voice. I set the Blue Ribbon manuscript on the piano stand and touched the title lightly with 2 fingers. Like someone who forgot the order of things, I said, "This belongs to the family. It belongs to the city. It does not belong to your guest list." She saw the pages and went pale in a way powder couldn't fix. "Where did you get that wet?" "David left it," I said. "Inside what you tried to sell." For a moment her control slipped. I saw the greed that had driven her edits and the fear that now undercut them. She recovered fast, smoothing her jacket. "Even if you force your way into the program, we still control the narrative," she shot back. "We decide how you're framed. We decide the photographs. We decide the introductions. Then frame me accurately," I said. "Or, I will frame myself." She left with a threat in her mouth she didn't finish. I watched her drive away and then called Ethan. We rehearsed the piece measure by measure at my kitchen table, me tapping rhythms on the wood, him tracing phrases in the air. He took the score home to practice and promised to keep it off social media, off group chats, off any channel Sophia monitored. He would let the first full notes belong to the room that mattered. Next day brought 2 developments. Harrington and Sons emailed to confirm the piano lot was withdrawn pending investigation, and the gala published an updated program on its website with the memorial segment listed. The line naming me as a contributor sat there without apology. It felt less like a win and more like oxygen. By nightfall Jonathan arrived. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "You could have asked," he said, gesturing toward the piano as if it had betrayed him. "You could have respected the order I've built." "I built the order you stand on," I answered. "You never learned to see it." He paced the length of the room, looking like a man who realizes the walls have doors he doesn't hold keys for. "You're going to humiliate me," he said, "in front of people who matter." I looked at David's title on the stand and then at the man who had called me a mistake. "I am going to tell the truth," I said. "If that humiliates you, that is not my doing." He pressed his palms flat on the lid, then pulled them back as if the wood burned. "Cancel the performance," he ordered. "It isn't yours to cancel," I said. He stared at me long enough for the past to flicker behind his eyes. For a second I thought I saw the boy who had fallen asleep to David's humming, who had pressed his ear against this same wood to feel the song through his bones. Then his jaw hardened. "You'll regret this," he said, and walked out into a night that did not care who he was. I slept without dreaming. In the morning, the committee sent a layout proof for the printed program. My name was there, set in black ink, impossible to crop without leaving a blank space. Beneath it, the memorial dedication. On the next page, the piece title, Blue Ribbon, by David Vera, performed by Ethan Vera. I forwarded the proof to Father Michael and to Miriam, who replied with a single word, "Finally," and a promise to sit where I could see her. I spent the rest of the day preparing the objects that had become my voice. I slipped the ribbon into a small glass frame. I placed the county form and David's letters in a slim portfolio. I photographed the ledger page in case someone misplaced the original. I put every copy on a flash drive that Father Michael labeled and stored in the parish safe. Then I polished the piano with the same care I gave it when David was alive, not to make it new, but to make it ready. At dusk, Ethan returned for one last run-through. He played the opening phrase softly, then with conviction, then with restraint. He set the bow down and looked at me across the shine of the keys. "Tomorrow," he said, "no speeches, just the music and the facts." Just the music and the facts. I agreed that when he left. I stood alone beside the instrument Jonathan had tried to sell and Sophia had tried to recast as a prop. I pressed my hand flat on the wood where David's letters had rested, where the ledger had lain open, where Ethan's bow had hovered. The room felt balanced, as if the house itself approved of the plan. Jonathan's insult at that dinner had been meant to end me. He had raised his glass and announced me as a mistake. Tomorrow we would answer in a way he could not control. A hall full of people would hear a melody written for the woman he tried to erase, and a printed line would pin my name to the record where scissors could not reach. I closed the fallboard gently and switched off the lamp. The keys hid their teeth, in the dark, waiting. So was I. I read them all with calm eyes. I had lived long enough to know the press could not grant dignity, nor could it strip it from me. My dignity was mine to keep. Jonathan retreated from the spotlight. His company issued a vague statement about family matters and miscommunication, but clients began to back away. Investors grew cautious, and his name was whispered in boardrooms with suspicion. Sophia tried to maintain appearances, attending luncheons and smiling for cameras, but people noticed the absence of her husband beside her. They noticed more than she thought they would, and in the silence of my own house, I knew the public stage was only one battlefield. The real one had been inside the walls of my family, and there, I had not been defeated. Ethan visited often. He brought his violin, sometimes played in my living room, the notes filling the air where David's voice used to hum. He asked about David, about the years before, about my youth, things he had never dared to ask when Jonathan and Sophia dictated what could and could not be said. I told him everything, not as a story to glorify myself, but because truth deserved breath after suffocating in silence. He listened as if every word mattered. That was enough to heal something inside me. One evening, while I was preparing tea, the phone rang. It was Miriam. Her voice was soft but steady. "You stood taller than I've ever seen you, Naomi," she said. "And you reminded me that silence can be as cruel as lies." "I only did what should have been done long ago," I answered. "But you did it," she said, and I heard the weight of her own regrets in that pause. Father Michael came to. He sat across from me with the parish ledger in his lap, tracing the ink with his fingers. "The truth is never without cost," he told me, "but it always changes the balance of things." Tonight, the weight tipped back to where it belonged, and I believed him because I felt lighter. Jonathan never came, not once, not a phone call, not a letter. I did not expect one. I did not wait for one. Sophia, however, sent me a letter through her lawyer, written in that polished, distant tone. It threatened legal action, claiming defamation, forgery, emotional harm. The lawyer's stamp tried to give it force, but its words were empty. I placed it in a drawer with the DNA test and David's manuscript. Together, they told the full story. And that story was stronger than her threats. The conservatory asked Ethan to return, to play David's piece again in a public concert. They wanted to make it part of their permanent archive, a program dedicated to local composers. He agreed, on one condition, that I would be present, seated in the front row, not as a forgotten widow, but as the keeper of the music. They agreed, and for the first time, I felt that the thread of David's life would not vanish into air. The day of that concert, I wore the same dark dress I had worn to his funeral, but without grief in my chest. I walked into that hall with my head high. People recognized me. They nodded, they smiled, not out of pity, but out of respect. And when Ethan lifted his violin again, the music soared not as evidence, but as celebration. I sat there, hands folded, knowing the truth had finally taken its place, not to punish, not to wound, but to restore. And now, looking back on all of it, I understand something I wish I had known earlier. Silence does not protect, it corrodes. I stayed quiet because David asked me to, because I thought preserving a name was more important than preserving myself. That silence allowed Jonathan and Sophia to build their own version of the truth, one that erased me, erased David, erased the labor that fed their privilege. I thought I was keeping peace, but I was only giving away ground. What I learned, what I want others my age to SIEs, that the most dangerous weapon in a family is not cruelty, it is neglect. The quiet turning away, the refusal to acknowledge sacrifice, the way children grow into adults and pretend their roots are dirt instead of foundation. That is what nearly destroyed me. Not hunger, not death, but erasure. And here is the colder truth. If you do not defend your place in the story, someone else will write you out of it. Blood will not protect you. Years of work will not protect you. The only shield you have is your own voice, your own willingness to name what others want forgotten. So if you have been sidelined, dismissed, branded as irrelevant, do not wait for gratitude that may never come. Speak, document, place your truth where no one can deny it. It will not always bring reconciliation, but it will keep you from vanishing. And that is enough. To those who have watched me walk this road, I will say this: I am not a mistake, and neither are you. Whatever they call you, however they reduce you, you hold pieces of the story they cannot erase if you refuse to let them. I carried mine in silence too long. Now I hand it to you. Carry yours in the open. Let it breathe. Thank you for walking with me through this darkness and into the clearing. If my story has reached you, if it has given you something to hold on to, stay with me. There will be more to tell. Subscribe, and we will walk the next chapter together.